Merry Christmas, everyone. This is the next installment of On His Majesty's Secret Service. I just want to remind everyone that this novel of mine is available and published on Amazon.com. Also, I'll try to do a reading at least once a week. Depends on the time I have and also how many views. Once I get at least 10 views on one installment, I will read the next one. So we continue with this chapter. Jane, under the auspices of Dame Hilary, has arrived in Switzerland and met her tour guide. "I am Mr. Pumpernickel, your tour guide. I hope you had a happy flight." "How delightful," she smiled, for the first time in what seemed ages. "And what will you show me?" "Whatever you wish," smiled Mr. Pumpernickel back at her mischievously. "And what shall we do?" "Again, anything you wish. I have many talents," and he bowed, to keep up with the part of entertaining a baroness. He was tanned, muscular, had a handsome face, and was tall, with fair hair and bright blue eyes. The slightest hint of laugh lines danced at the corners of his mouth, playfully. He wore a pointed hat and lederhosen, traditional in those parts of the world, but instead of looking ridiculous, it fit him rather well, she thought, as she sized him up and looked him up and down. "Yes, it was a very pleasant flight," she retorted. "You have your baggage check. Will you follow me, please? And first your passport. This way." She followed him through the passport control and out into the customs hall. There were a few standers by. She noticed his head nod casually. A man with a briefcase under his arm, hanging about, moved away. She studiously examined the baggage check. Beyond the scrap of cardboard, she noticed the man slip into one of the row of telephone booths in the main hall outside the customs area. "Do you speak German?" asked Mr. Pumpernickel. His tongue flicked out and briefly touched his lips. "No, I'm afraid not," she lied. "French, perhaps?" "A little. Enough for my work." Again she lied. "Yes, that is important, yes?" Her suitcase was unloaded off the trolley onto the barrier. Mr. Pumpernickel flashed some kind of a pass at the customs officer. It was very quickly done, but she caught a glimpse of her photograph and the heading Bundespolizei. The officer said deferentially, "Bitte, sir," and stuck his symbol tape in the color of the day, yellow, on her suitcase. A porter took it and they walked across to the entrance. When they came out on the steps, an anonymous black Mercedes 300 SE saloon pulled smartly out of the parking area and slid to a stop behind them. Next to the chauffeur sat the man who had gone to the telephone. Her suitcase was put in the boot and they moved off fast in the direction of Zurich. A few hundred yards down the wide road, the man beside the driver, who, she noticed, had been surreptitiously watching in the twin driving mirror, said softly, "As good?" and the car turned right-handed up a side road which was marked Eingang verboten, mit Ausnahme von Akduma a Postner von Privatflüge zugen. She was amused as she ticked off the little precautions. It was obvious that she was still very much on probation. The car came up with the hangars to the left on the main building, drove slowly between them, and pulled up beside a bright hotel. "Precautions of the Home Office," said the man beside the driver. "You understand, you're in a fragile, vulnerable state right now." "Of course," she replied. She got out and Mr. Pumpernickel went with her. He showed her to her room and said, "I have taken the liberty of checking you in. Tomorrow I have much planned for you." "And tonight?" she queried. "Anything you wish," he smiled. "Dinner would be brilliant," she replied. "Done." While she waited for dinner, she was soon swept up with the wonder and view of the snow-covered Alps already receiving the eager skiers in this late summer, early autumn. She opened her French doors and stepped out onto her patio to see what she had was an excellent view. She had just begun unpacking her luggage when a knock came at the door. She hesitated, checked for her pistol, then remembered she had surrendered it to Anne back in London, and was now on her own recognizance. She had her prowess in various forms of fighting and self-defense. She answered the door warily, in case it was another assassin from Mr. Woodcock, sent to attack her. To her relief, it was the only concierge. "From London," he smiled, and handed her a large bunch of flowers and turned to grasp the handle of the cart that was behind him. "And this?" And he wheeled in the cart, an icy bucket of champagne on top and covered tureen and dishes below. He served her the meal, popped the cork, and poured the champagne. I love champagne. Any kind of bubble drink, actually. I love bubbles. Bubbles make me happy. Back to the book. "If there is nothing else, madam," and when she nodded, he left her to enjoy the sumptuous dinner. She took in the scent of the flowers, mingled with the fine food laid before her. Chewing and then hurrying out onto her balcony like an excited schoolgirl, she sipped the champagne and looked eagerly at the slopes. They were calling her name. Jane! She had to pull the chain on her past rat now, forget it, and move on. After she finished dinner and dressed for the slopes, when she went to the pro shop to get kitted out, there was a frightful line. As she waited, she looked about her and saw a neon sign announcing, "Hang gliding, better than skiing." She followed the signs and found a helicopter adapted by Sud Aviation for mountain rescue work. but this one had the red G with the coronet on its fuselage. So, she was going to be taken for a flight rather than a ride. "You have traveled in one of these machines before, no?" asked the pilot, after she had paid and kitted out. "It is very pleasant. One obtains a fine view of the Alps." The pilot's eyes sparkled with delight. They climbed up the aluminum ladder. "Mind your head, please." It was a six-seater, luxurious in red leather. Above and in front of them, under his perspex canopy, the pilot lifted a thumb. The ground staff pulled away the chocks, and the big blades began to move. As they accelerated, the men on the ground drew away, shielding their faces against the whirling snow. There was a slight jolt, and then they were climbing fast, and the crack of the radio from the control tower went silent. Now it was just her and the pilot, alone above the Alps, with the Zurcher Zooting. She leaned sideways and said loudly, against the rattle of the machine, "Where are we heading for?" The driver exclaimed, shouting it, "Into the Alps! Into the high Alps!" He waved towards the window. "It is very beautiful. You like the mountains, yeah?" "I love them," she shouted. "Just like Scotland."